Hi, Caden. I hope that you're doing well. So, last week we were discussing your C major scale, which, remember, for the trumpet is a little different than the C major scale on the piano. The trumpet is a B flat instrument, which means every time you say the name of a note, it will always sound a whole step lower than what you would hear on the piano, which is a C instrument. So, C major for the piano is different than C major for the trumpet. Your C major would be the equivalent of a B flat major scale on the piano, right? Just something to keep in mind while we're working on that. And I'll give you a little refresher for what the fingerings for that scale are. So you have C is open, then you're going to go 1 and 3 for your D. Your E is 1 and 2. Your F is your first valve by itself. Open again for your G. Your A is going to be 1 and 2. Your B is going to be your second valve. And then your top C will be open one more time. And remember, as you're going up, your air has to get faster and faster, and those corners have to get closer and closer and closer together. Okay? But for today, I'm going to yap at you about what we call the harmonic series. So, what is the harmonic series? What does that even mean? Well, every time that we hear a note, there is an infinite series of notes that exist both above it and under it. The notes that exist under it are what we call undertones, and the notes that exist above it are what we call overtones. I think the higher and higher that the overtones get, the harder it is for us to hear. And kind of the same for the lower and lower that they get. We mostly perceive just the note that's being played. But maybe like so and it's really cool. So say we have a C, right? The overtones exist in a way that when you play this C, on top of it there is a G. Above that G that is like existing up here. You aren't really it's not being played, but it can be perceived and it exists up here. But above this G, there's another C, and then above the C, you have an E. Above the E, there's another G, and then the G above the G you have like a flat 7, which is like a it's like a really weird B, but it's not quite in tune. And then above that B you have a C, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you go higher and higher. What you also may have noticed is that the distance between the notes started to shrink as we got higher. It started out as a fifth, C, D, E, F, G, C, and G. Then it went from a fifth to a fourth, G, A, B, C. Then from a fourth to a third, C, D, E. And then it stayed another third, E, F, G. And then from the G up to the B, it became like it's essentially like a second, but it really is in practice it's more like a flat third. And then from there, you have a second from that really flat B to your C. It's really cool. But what does that have to do with trumpet at all? Well, as we were playing on our C major scale, you may have noticed that there were some fingerings that stayed the same, but we had different notes that came out with them. Well, we have the harmonic series to thank for that. That is really how we get more notes out of such a limited amount of buttons. We're tapping into those what we call overtones and undertones. You have what is called the fundamental tone, which is the tone that the length of the instrument wants to vibrate by itself. But everything Above that and everything below it is what we call part of the harmonic series. That's why we can be open or on the trombone in first position and get one note. And if we blow faster and get our corners closer, we get a different note. Here's our B flat or your C. And without changing my slide at all, just blowing faster and pulling my corners closer together, we'll get an F. It's a really cool concept. But for your homework this week, I really still just want you to work on that C major scale. But I thought it would be cool for you to know why these instruments are able to make notes or so many notes with just 3 buttons. It's pretty cool. But yeah, we owe it all to the harmonic series. All of the brass instruments work this way. That's why with such limited buttons, we're able to get all 12 of the notes. But again, buddy, I hope that things are going well, and I hope to see you again soon. You have a nice one. Bye-bye.